Hello everyone, how are you doing today? In this video, we are going to cover chapter number 2 of the ACCA exam FM. The name of this chapter is the economic environment for business. Now, the reason why they have put the economics chapters into the studies of financial management is because financial managers should have a strong sight over the economic affairs of a country so that they can protect the businesses from the external economic environment. With that in mind, let's start with our chapter. If you come to the page number 14 of your lecture notes, we have our couple of definitions. First off is microeconomics, which involves the economic behavior of individual firms, consumers, or households, whereas the macroeconomics is concerned with the country at large, the economic behavior of large aggregates such as national income, level of employment, and GDP. It could be better understood if we can put that in our graph. Basically, there are two levels of economy. The upper one is called macroeconomics, and the lower one is called microeconomics. Now, macroeconomics mostly deals with the large aggregates such as the level of employment, GDP, interest rates, etc. Whereas microeconomics is mostly concerned with behavior of households, that is the consumption and the spending behavior of households, consumers, that's the utility and satisfaction levels, and then we have firms, how firms interact with each other from an economics perspective, of course. Now, in this chapter, we will mostly be concerned about macroeconomics and we'll be learning about it in detail, because whatever happens at the macroeconomic level will eventually have an effect at the microeconomic level and at the individual firm level. This is the level where our company, our businesses stand. So we must have a good understanding of the macroeconomic level. Coming back to our notes. We have got a macroeconomics policies and objectives. Now, the best way to understand this chapter is via the perspective of a government. You need to suppose that you are a representative of a newly elected government and you have been given an economy to work on. Macroeconomic policy involves objectives, targets, and instruments. Let's look at them each one in a chart format. It will be better for better understanding. Firstly, we have got economics. Firstly, we got an economy and we are moving towards the economic policy. The first thing we read was the objectives. That's economic objectives. Then we read about targets, economic targets, and then we read about tools or instruments. Now, the most basic of objectives for any government for the economy would be growth, That's number one factor. Full employment. Balance of payment controls. And inflation control. Now, assuming these are the objectives which the government intends to work on, what it can do, it can set targets such as percentage increase in GDP per year, or it could be percentage increase in level of employment per year, and so on. Now, for those targets to be achieved, there need to be something, some set of rules that the people should follow. For that, we have an economic system, and that system is affected by 4 tools which the government controls. That is fiscal policy, then we have monetary policy, then we have exchange rate policy, and lastly we have trade policy. Now these are the things through which a government influences an economy. If we come back to our notes, you will see that we have covered these areas so far in the chart format. Moving on. Now the next thing we have is the concept of policy objectives and instruments. Now it might seem very easy from the citizens' perspective that governments don't do enough, or government's policy making is weak. There is because these instruments, no matter how careful you are, most of the time they collide with each other, they go against with each other. The best, a few of them are the few of their collisions are given below here as an example. That is, growth in economy can be achieved by deployment of modern technology, resulting in conflict between steady growth and full employment. Now, the thing is, growth can be achieved via modern technology. In this case, the government is increasing the growth, but at the same time, that growth is achieved via mechanization, via industrialization, resulting in decline in this objective, that is full employment. That's again one of the things which the government is focused on. So you can see how easy it is for the objectives to collide with each other. Then we have another example, that is, to create jobs and growth, demand needs to pick up, but once the demand picks up, it creates a surge on imports, negatively affecting balance of payments. as more jobs are produced in an economy, the people will start to get rich and they will demand good as their consumption will start to increase. As a result, this will create pressure on our imports, which will result in the decline in the balance of payment. Perhaps it could even create a deficit instead of surplus. So here the employment is contradicting with the balance of payment control objective. The third thing is to keep the value of currency stable. Interest rates might need to be kept high, which deters companies from investing, impacting growth. Now, this area is a bit technical because when the interest rate acts at a risk-free rate of return for government securities, so if that becomes high, more and more investments will show a negative NPV, resulting in investors obstructing investors from investing in the economy. So that's the conflict of interest. There are a number of reasons for that as well. Alright, the next thing is achieving best mix of policies involves a number of problems. Inadequate information, information that the upper government gets is might not be accurate because of the so much hierarchy in between. Then there are time lags. By the time the information gets to the higher authorities, it's already too little, it's already too late. Then we've got political pressure. Irrespective, even if the information gets there even on time, if there's a political pressure, then it becomes difficult for the government to act on the objectives. Then we have got unpredictable side effects. As with everything else, there will always be unpredictable side effects of an economic policy. Then we have influence on other countries. Our economic policy will definitely have an influence on other countries. For example, if China today starts to tax their exports, this will create a rise in prices in the toy industry, because around let's just say, for a rough figure, 90% of the toys are now made in China. So most of the countries around the world import their toys from China. The toys prices will start to increase because of the economic decisions taken by a government which is not even their own country's government. So irrespective of which part of the world you live in, there will always be an impact of economic policy of one country over the other. We live in a global village now. Conflict between policy instruments, as I've just explained to you earlier. Now, the first instrument that the government has to control the economy is the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, simply put, is a tax policy, if you ask me. In this policy, through this policy, actually, government creates demands and also reduces demand by using the taxation systems. Now, there are three ways through which a government can do that. First is spending more and financing this by borrowing. Now, if the government starts to spend more into the economy, the producers will get an incentive because they don't have to worry about the sales, whether the products will be sold. They will be more focused on production because they know that eventually our products will be sold. There's an increase in demand in the economy, and that demand is produced by the government. And from where the governments are getting this fund, they are getting the funds from the International Monetary Fund or from World Bank. So they are financing this by borrowing. Then we've got through this strategy, basically they create a demand and incentivize the producers to produce more. Then we have got collecting more in taxes without increasing public spending. Now, This is done by most of the countries that are heavily in debt. They collect more in taxes and do less public spending. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that, not just the debt. Perhaps now the government wants to reduce demand into the economy, so they start this approach. They tax the people and reduce their expenditure in the economy. Mostly the government spends on transportation, education, medical facilities, and other such things which cannot be left to the private sectors. So they will cut their funds in these areas to reduce the demand in an economy. Then we've got collecting more in taxes in order to increase public spending. Now governments they collect more and they put more money into the economy. This is again another way to create demand, to circulate money into the economy if it's becoming restricted to in the hands of few. This strategy now is mostly followed by the government after the financial crisis. So because people were very much conscious about spending their money, they were putting it in the banks and the deposits. So they were not very much confident with the economic. They were not very much confident with the investment. So this is one of the ways through which the governments can circulate the money into the economy. Now, government in spending is an injection into the economy, whereas taxes are withdrawal from the economy. That's simply put. After that, we got fiscal policy manages aggregate demand into the economy. As I've just told you, it's a demand tool. These three things I've already explained to you. Now, the effect of fiscal policy on businesses. By increasing the level of demand, it's quite obvious that it is good for us as a business because our products will be sold more. There will be less stock available as a wastage. We can increase prices as well slightly, so to gain profit from the increase in demand. However, tax changes by the fiscal policy affect businesses. Example, employment taxes affects labor cost. If the employment taxes are increased, it will have a direct effect on our labor cost. If the VAT is increased, it will have a direct effect on our material cost, because each tax will be put on each stage of the value addition. So that's for fiscal policy. Next up, we have got a monetary policy. Now, monetary policy is the regulation of the economy through the control of the monetary system. And how do they do that? By operating variables such as money supply. Again, they do that with three ways. The first one is money supply, then there's the level of interest rates, and the condition of the availability of credit. These are the three ways through which they can influence the monetary policy. First point is money is important because of all the wheels of the economy. That's the basic thing. Now, what would be the target of a monetary policy? That would be growth in the size of money supply. That's important. As the economy expands, there needs to be more money in the economy so that they can continue the process of expansion. Normally, the central bank is responsible for increasing the money supply. After that, we've got a level of interest. Again, the central bank sets the level of interest. Now, interest rates have a very strange effect. High interest rates will stabilize the currencies. However, this will deter investors from investing in the economy because more of the investment will show a negative NPV. NPV stands for net present value. We'll be covering those topics in the financial management lectures only later on. Then we have got the volume of credit, a growth in the volume of credit. Now, one of the most important factors for any economy to move forward is the availability of credit. How easy it is for the businessmen and to the people such as entrepreneurs and startups to obtain the funds to raise their businesses. This is one of the things. Again, the policy set by the governments, ease of obtaining finance will definitely good due to the economy, because people can borrow on easy terms and use their money to expand their businesses. Then we got volume of expenditure in the economy. Such type of measures which I've just discussed will increase the expenditure in the economy. As more and more money is expensed and more money is earned, this creates a rotation in the economy of the money which benefits the all. Then because the money supply is the possible intermediate target of the economic policy, again whichever is not the main target but it could be an intermediate target. Central banks set the interest rates to remove the political influence. Normally, across the world, central banks set the interest rates independent of the government. However, government does have the right to suggest them to increase or decrease. However, the central banks across the world are normally at full liberty to set the interest rates by themselves. They respond to the changing economic environments. Now, interest rate changes affect the borrowing cost for the businesses. Higher interest rates means fewer investments will show the positive returns, as I've just discussed with you. The third tool which the government has is the exchange rate. I can show you again on the chart. We have covered the fiscal policy, we have covered the monetary policy, and now we are talking about the third tool which the government has to influence the economy. Now, exchange rate is the rate through which one currency can be traded in exchange for the other. There are a number of factors that influences the exchange rate. First off is demand. Like with any commodity, an increase in demand in one currency will have an appreciation effect in that currency. For example, if today, let's take an artificial country named Concordia. Now, Concordia is a normal country. Normal country. $1 of $1 is equals to 10 Concordion's currencies. Now, the demand is pretty much stable for the couple of years, but recent news indicated that they have struck oil. Now, the exchange markets across the world will be struck with this information, and Concordion's currency will start gaining appreciation. As a result, within minutes or perhaps hours, it could get to the figure of $1 is equals to 8 Concordion's currency, and within a week it could get to $1 equal to 5 Concordion's currency. So simply put, the demand for those currencies, because more and more people will now intend to buy the Concordion's oil, and for that they have to pay in Concordion's currency. So that's why the demand for it starts to increase, because people start to put reserves in their accounts to gain from the depreciated value of the currency they have right now. So the second thing is the rate of inflation. Rate of inflation in one country will always have a effect on the other in terms of currency. For example, a thing which can be bought for $1 in US and could be bought with the 10 Concordion's currency in the Concordia, and that's the difference actually between the two currencies. Simply put, is the logic of inflation between the two countries. Then we got the interest rate compared with the interest rate in other countries. Each country's interest rate, as I just told you, interest rates need to be kept high year by year. A small proportion, not a significant hike, but a small proportion of height, few basis points, will result in stability of the currency. However, even a steady increase will have a negative effect on the investments. We will be discussing about inflation, and we will be discussing about interest rates again in the second last chapter of the FM syllabus. And we will also be computing the interest rates and the inflation rates. Then we have got balance of payment. Balance of payments implies the net exports, that is the revenue from net exports, is more than the cost of imports, and we have got a balance of payment surplus. Vice versa of this, cost of import is higher than the revenue from exports. As a result, we have got a balance of payment deficit. Now, both ways are extreme form of in either direction is bad. Too much of deficit is bad for the economy because it will start to depreciate the currency. Too much of surplus will put pressure on the imports as well because it will start to appreciate the currency. Then we got speculation. Speculators are always there in the foreign exchange dealers and banks. When they observe the change in currency, they are very much likely they start buying and selling depending upon the condition, and as a result act as a multiplier effect on the currency market. Government policies have an impact on the exchange rates. Strong governments and over which the people have confidence will always have a positive effect on the currency value. Means people will have more. People will be inclined more towards the investment in their own country, and as a result, their currency value will start to increase. Then we've got total income and expenditure in the domestic economy. The more the rolling there is of the funds in the economy, the more its value is there, and would not be easy for the currency to depreciate that fast. Then we got output capacity and level of employment. The more people are rich at the middle class level, the more value again the currency has because money is distributed among the society and not held in the hands of few. Then we've got the growth in the money supply, which we discussed in the monetary segment. Then we have got the consequences of exchange rate policy. Exchange rate policy can rectify a balance of trade deficit to bring that fall in exchange rate. They can create a fall in the exchange rates. They prevent a balance of trade surplus from getting too large. Again, as I just giving you the example, too large of balance of trade surplus is also bad for the economy. It creates pressure on the imports. To stabilize the exchange rate, a stable currency increases confidence in the currency and promote international trade. And that's basically the objective, or you can say the consequences of exchange rate policy. The main purpose over here, unlike the monetary and fiscal policy, is to create a balance so that things don't get out of hand. That's the main objective. Now, the policy involves basically two ways through which the exchange rate policy can have an effect. Most governments firstly follow the fixed exchange rate. Now, fixed exchange rate implies that the government keeps the exchange rate steady irrespective of whatever happening in the economy. If the Cambodian dollar, in our example, starts to reach 5 Cambodian currency for $1, the government will intervene because they want their currency to be at 10 only and not come to the 5 per dollar, because this could seriously sabotage and have an effect on their import, put pressure on their imports because foreign goods are now cheaper. So what they do is they buy dollars from the international market, or they have their reserves as well. They start putting that into the market. They start putting in order to depreciate the currency, they start putting dollars, increase the supply of the money. If they want to appreciate the currency, their own currency, what they can do is they start to put dollars into the economy so that their demand for the dollar, the supply of the dollar surpasses the demand, and their own currency in this way becomes stable. Then we've got floating exchange rate. Now, floating exchange rate implies that basically floating exchange rate gives the true view of an economy. They are always at equilibrium. They incorporate all the factors of the economy. Any news, any demand factor, any policy effect becomes incorporated immediately into the exchange rates, and that's why floating exchange rates tends to fluctuate very fast. It could be one rate in the morning and the other in the evening. Let's read out its property. A ruling exchange rate is always at equilibrium, as I just told you. A managed floating rate refers to a system whereby authorities will intervene in foreign exchange market. In the floating exchange rate as well, they have some sort of intervention if they believe that the things are getting out of hand too far. So they start to intervene. Again, the same approach is used. If they want to increase the value of their own currency, to appreciate their domestic currency, they'll start to throw dollars into the market, and if they want to reduce it, they start pulling the dollar from the market. That is, they start buying dollars from the exchanges and the banks. This way, their own currency, domestic currency value starts to fall. How can they do that? They can use their official reserve or foreign currency to buy back their own domestic currency, or they can sell their domestic currency to buy more foreign currency for the official reserves. Now, government can only influence market rates with the intervention, whereas speculation has a much bigger short-term impact. Now, the effect of exchange rates on the businesses, the main thing over which we are discussing all of this. That is, if a lower exchange rate the first point over here is the domestic goods are cheaper in foreign markets, so demand for export increases. Because of the lower rate of our domestic currency, our goods are cheaper in the foreign market, and that's why people will try to export as much as they can to gain the benefit. And the importers from across the world will also try to benefit from this by giving the contracts to the domestic producers. After that, we got foreign goods are more expensive, so demand for the import falls. Now, foreign goods, as with everything, because the exports are domestic goods are cheaper in the foreign market, the export increases. At the same time, foreign goods becomes more expensive, so the demand for import starts to fall. However, those industries that import raw materials will face the consequences because of the fact that the raw materials will become expensive as well. Not all countries across the world have got an equal distribution of mineral and raw materials that are needed for the productions of necessities that people use every day. So this will have a serious consequences in this area. However, in case of higher exchange rate, domestic goods become expensive, and as a result, it hits the export, and export starts to fall. Where imports becomes cheaper, so the people starts to import more goods, and because foreign goods are now cheaper. Then we got imported raw materials. Again, the same thing. In this case, the imported raw material becomes cheaper, so the cost of production for those goods pertaining to imported raw material falls. Now, there are a number of ways through which the businesses can defend themselves from these effects. The first is buy currency forward or at a fixed or known price. Basically includes forward exchange contracts. We'll be studying about that in the second last chapter. It's an over-the-counter contract, can be arranged with the bank. Then we got dealing in hard currency. Instead of using our currency and their currency, for example, in our case, the US and the Concordia, why don't we exchange it with the British pound? In this way, none of the countries will gain the unfair advantage because of the currency differences. Then we got operations can be managed. Operations can be managed involves we can manage the operations, we can do them in an area or perhaps in a time where in which there is the least fluctuation of the currency. Then we got invoicing in domestic currency. Consumers, or you can say the businesses, can invoice their customers or consumers in a domestic currency, so the risk of exchange rate falls on the customers. Then we have got activities can be outsourced to the local market if the services being received from the foreign market, or the goods being received from the foreign market, can be produced locally, or the local producers can substitute those goods. Then it's best to use the domestic producers because they are cheaper. Then we've got firms can aim at segments in the market which are not particularly price sensitive on the basis of quality and exclusivity. We can always focus on those areas of the market which are not particularly susceptible to the exchange rate fluctuations. Instead of going to the cover a wide area of the market, we can focus on those areas. That's beneficial for the business.